Kiss, and welcome back to KTP Network. Now, if you know me, you know I love The Matrix. I love Enter the Matrix. I love everything about it. I love the Matrix universe. I grew up with The Matrix, so it definitely holds a place near and dear to my heart. Um, and especially because I was one of those people who even even now I have tinfoil hat moments. The Matrix was definitely I was definitely Matrix woke back then, and still am. Not the terminology that's woke now. Just being awake for the most part. On certain things, you know what I'm saying. But yeah, it's definitely a really good universe to dive into. There are so many theories, so many things to unfold, and so many things to unpack. So let's react to the Enter the Matrix is still pretty good by Fuzzy Slippers. Ooh, I like that. Okay. Let's go ahead and see what this person has for us, what they have put together.
In 2003, in between the releases of The Matrix Reloaded
Yes.
and The Matrix Revolutions,
Animatrix was so good.
the Wachowskis would produce an animated anthology series called The Animatrix, made up of 9 short stories animated by several Japanese.
And I didn't see all of them, so it's something I definitely have to still delve into. But the video games I have played up and down, and movies I have played up and down, even the ones that people don't like, that are not critically acclaimed.
Studios, the compilation served to expand the world of the Matrix, exploring the
Yes.
history between humans and machines, what led up to their war, and fleshing
us
out
all
some
that.
minor characters from the movies, with a few
Yes.
shorts serving as self-contained stories disconnected from the main trilogy. After the original film, the Animatrix anthology and its stories are my favorite things to come out of this franchise. And while I like all the shorts to varying levels, my favorite of those animated shorts and the
Kid's story was great. I didn't realize, because I hadn't watched the anthology stories when they introduced him in the movies. I was like, "Who the heck is this?" And he's like, "You saved my life." No, you saved yourself, and he did. He did. Neil was no help in this at all.
one that stuck with me the most is World Record. Directed by Takeshi Koike and animated by Madhouse, World Record might have the most unique art style out of all the shorts. Characters have exaggerated proportions to them that's reminiscent of how the show Aeon Flux designed its characters. There's a
Yes,
heavy
I
use
love
of
Aeon
shadows
Flux.
used for the shading of backgrounds, clothing, and the design of characters. The animation itself is very fluid. That, combined with some slow motion, really helped to add weight to the characters' movements. World Record's unique style isn't something I've seen very often in
I think I
animation,
remember seeing this.
with the only 2 examples that I can think of that resemble it being Afro Samurai and Redline, which makes sense as Takeshi Koike was involved in both projects. The short follows Dan Davis, an athlete at a track meet attempting to beat a sprinting record, and who is under observation by agents.
And that's
As
his
Dan
handler,
and his
right?
fellow runners take off, we
One
see
of
him
them
push
is
his
his
body
handler.
past its limits, destroying the muscles in his legs to run faster and take the lead. However, he's moving too fast, dangerously close to breaking the barrier between the real world and the Matrix. Agents swoop in and try to stop him, but he's become even faster than them. Faster than the Matrix. This leads to Dan escaping the simulation and briefly waking up in the real world in his pod. Before he can understand what's happening, a machine drone puts him back under and we cut back to the race. Dan ragdolling across the finish line and breaking the world record. The short ends with Dan in the hospital, seemingly a vegetable, and unable to walk now. A lone agent still keeping an eye on him. Dan is still in there though, speaking one word before attempting to stand. Lifting himself up and breaking his leg brace, he repeats it again as the agent watching him frantically tries to stop him. Sit down. On his feet, Dan seemingly begins to float, the short coming to an abrupt end as he falls to his knees, with it being left ambiguous as to whether he escaped from the Matrix.
And some people are saying that we live in a simulation. What do you think about that? Let me know what you think in the comments down below.
Or not. A story that captures man's triumph over machines, World Record brings to mind the legend of John Henry, a freed black man who defeated a drilling machine in a race at the cost of his own life. It can also be seen as a story of enlightenment, Dan becoming more than human by pushing past his limitations, freeing himself from his mortal form, and the old world as he ascends to a new world. Anyways, this video is actually about the game Enter the Matrix. Yeah, sorry if the intro feels detached to the rest of this video,
No,
but
it
I've always
was
wanted to talk
great.
about the Animatrix and World Record,
And you
and
should.
I didn't want to start the video doing my usual shtick, discussing my history with the Matrix, or my love for the series, or ranting about how much the Matrix Resurrections sucks ass. The Animatrix does technically tie into this game, but I'll get into it in a bit, and after this sponsored break. Hey gamers, are you missing out on the newest titles due to a lack of funds? Well, I have a plan, and it's a good one. The channel, click the movie followed Office. So, the Matrix franchise. I don't think I have to go over much about it. Most of you probably got a decent understanding of it, even if you've never watched the movies. The first movie followed office drone and hacker Thomas Anderson, aka Neo, as he discovers that the world he lives in is actually a simulation.
A whole
Making
lot.
contact with Trinity and Morpheus, he learns humanity fought and lost a war with machines. Mankind effectively
6
wiped
times
out
over.
centuries ago. Machines have been growing humans and enslaving them by trapping them in the simulation of the Matrix, in order to harvest them for energy. Yeah, that makes absolutely no sense, but the original idea wasn't to use them as energy, but to use the connected mind of all the humans as a neural link to work as a sorta organic supercomputer, I think. But that got changed since the studio producing the movie thought movie audiences would be too dumb to understand the concept, so they dumbed it down to using humans as batteries. Anywho, after being freed from the Matrix, Neo learns that his destiny is to become the One, basically this series' version of Jesus. A hero prophesies to free humanity from their machine.
This Hollywood at its peak had a lot of Christian references in movies, and that's when they were at their best, because a lot of people like seeing the good guy on screen, and there was a lot of interesting Christian stories out there. Like, they take certain chapters and they create an entire movie out of it. There are very interesting stories out there. The most interesting, if I could say, which is why Hollywood was inspired by them for quite some time, and then it started diminishing, and it just started turning into something, pivoting from being inspired by Christianity and creating films to antagonizing it, which is where we are now, and the whole rage and stuff, and the Christian rage and all that. But this is an entirely different topic, not what we're talking about now.
Machine overlords. Lots of shooting and kung fu ensues. Also, the human resistance love wearing trench coats or black leather when jacking into the Matrix. While highly impractical for fighting, they do look really stylish, especially Carrie-Anne Moss as Trinity. There's a lot more to the themes and symbolism of the movies, but there's better
I loved
video.
her as Trinity. I just hoped, I had hoped that they would have kept that, awesome leather fit. I guess because she's older, she doesn't want to wear that anymore, but it was great. It's what made her character the best.
SAS on
One of the
YouTube, we can
best.
cover that for ya. If you want to know my opinions on each of the movies, the original is still the GOAT. I think Reloaded is better than people give it credit. Revolutions isn't great, but it does have the
I like Reloaded, except for like that orgy scene that I did not want to take part in. Like, what are you talking about? That seems too, what? If I want to watch Korn, I'm going to. I don't want to see it in a movie. Like, that's just such a turnoff. So I feel like that was a fetish of theirs.
best example of live-action Dragon Ball Z fighting in a Hollywood movie. And Resurrections is dog shit. Just a lazy rehash that tries to recreate what the first movie did in order to sell it to a new audience. Basically, the Matrix
Mistake.
equivalent of The Force Awakens. Now, due to
Right.
the overwhelming success of The Matrix and the hyped-up releases of its sequels, the franchise was perfect for adapting into a video game. However, instead of the usual movie licensed tie-in game that tries to adapt the plot of the movie into a game, Enter the Matrix is instead its own original story. Well, mostly. It's also canon to the movies, filling in the blanks for certain subplots, and working as a bridge to connect the movies to the Animatrix. Oh, and to set up the events for the final movie in the trilogy, The Matrix Revolutions, before it was released. Honestly, it was a rather unique approach.
I didn't notice that the Animatrix was involved until I saw that Thaddeus scene. Like, years later, I didn't put it together. Actually, decades. It was well done because I didn't notice it as an animation.
to a video game adaptation at the time, using different media as a way to flesh out the world and its story, something that's still pretty rare today, with The Witcher and Final Fantasy XV being the only other examples that immediately come to mind, though the Witcher games did their own thing separate from the books, maintaining continuity and character relations with the original story, but doing its own thing. And Final Fantasy XV did the reverse idea, using a movie, anime, and books to flesh out its game, to questionable results. In Enter the Matrix, we play as some side characters from The Matrix Reloaded, Ghost and Captain Niobe. Their actors from the movie would provide their likenesses and voices for the game, with Anthony Wong as Ghost and Jada Pinkett Smith as Niobe. Insert lazy Will Smith Oscar slap joke here. The game's plot kicks off with Ghost and Niobe investigating a package dropped in the Matrix left by the crew of another Resistance ship, called the Osiris. The information the drop contains cost the crew their lives, and after getting the info, it's revealed that they discovered a massive army of machine sentinels drilling down below.
You know why you can't really tell? Because they slapped a filter over it. Kind of like a VHS filter, so you're not really able to see his face that well. But in the Animatrix, you see that it's obviously animated.
Heading for Zion, the last human city. The overwhelming amount of machines indicates they plan to completely wipe out the Resistance and humanity. The last moments of the Osiris crew and their struggle to deliver the drop is covered in the Animatrix, and the short fittingly dubbed The Final Flight of the Osiris.
Ooh, yes.
Unlike the rest of the Animatrix, this short was made with CG and by our friends at Squaresoft, who were fresh off the financial bomb that was Final Fantasy The Spirits Within, but also fresh off the success of Final Fantasy X and X-2, with some of the English voice actors from those games returning for the Animatrix. After learning about the machine army marching on Zion, the game then weaves in and out of the plot for The Matrix Reloaded, with Ghost and Niobe filling the other members of Zion about what's coming, interacting with and assisting some of the characters from the movie like Morpheus, and ending with a setup for The Matrix Revolutions. While I think the rest of the game's story is fine, it can feel disjointed and a bit confusing, especially if you haven't watched The Matrix Reloaded before playing it.
It feels, in a way, certain missions feel like it's a fun game to play. A lot of fun, but sometimes certain missions make me feel like, what the hell did I go through all of this for? Like the Keymaker, our paths were not meant to cross, I'm sorry, and then he gives us the key later on in the movie, you know? Like, it just, some missions feel like, what the hell did I just do this for? But again, this is coming from someone who's played this game at least 30 times in his lifetime, okay? I was that obsessed.
Because I know how valued my opinion is on this ship, I won't bother to tell you that I think it's insane for you not to wait for a support team. And for the record, when I cart your bodies back to Zion, do you prefer cremation or the gardens?
Sparks, your faith in us remains a source of personal inspiration.
Well, I am what I am, and I do what I can.
Then can you shut up and hit the button?
Your wish, Captain. My captain is my keystroke : / execute command.
She never
In Enter the Matrix, you can choose to play through the entire game as either Ghost or Niobe,
Ghost
though it isn't a
so
basic cosmetic choice. Despite sharing many levels, both characters have scenes, objectives, and gameplay sections unique to them, so it's worth doing a playthrough for each character, and it helps extend the runtime for Enter the Matrix, which lasts about 5 to 6 hours on a single playthrough. In the vein of Max Payne, this game is primarily a third-person shooter, with the ability to slow down the action through the use of a bullet time mechanic, which Max Payne might have borrowed from the original Matrix movie, but since both properties were inspired by the...
Thank you, finally, somebody fucking said it. The Matrix was the first one to introduce bullet time. It's so annoying. People say, oh, Max Payne brought this out. No, but the Matrix was first. Hello? They introduced 360 and bullet time.
Shooting in John Woo films, like Hard Boiled, and released around the same time, they both technically borrowed it from that. Maybe. I discussed the origins of the bullet time mechanic for a bit in my Max Payne video, so check that out if you haven't already. Bullet time here, though, is a lot more stylish and acrobatic, with your characters spinning through the air as they jump and shoot, backflipping and running on walls. While not exactly necessary, it does make combat more stylish and fun. Unlike Max Payne, though, there isn't an item you can use to fill up your focus meter, and instead it'll slowly charge on its own over time or faster when you kill an opponent. Your focus also drains pretty fast when in use, so you can't abuse it to get out of trouble if enemies are overwhelming you. Before getting into the nitty-gritty of the shooting and melee combat, I want to briefly talk about the controls. Since I couldn't get the PC version of the game to function properly, I settled for emulating the PS2 version of the game, which is what I played as a kid. While Enter the Matrix controls fine for the most part, certain things are a little awkward. For example, the camera. Since it wasn't quite the standard yet at the time of its release, you can't control the camera with the right analog stick. Instead, the right stick works like it does in GTA 3, bringing you into a first-person perspective to look around and to manually shoot. To control the camera, you use the left stick, which also moves your character, creating annoying situations as your camera is basically spazzing out when you change directions too fast.
So how did
Made
you
worse
mod
when
it?
fighting multiple enemies in hand-to-hand combat, as the camera often can't decide which enemy to focus on as you fight. It also has a habit of zooming
Yeah,
in
I
too
hate that.
close if you're backed
It
into a
does that.
corner, or inside smaller corridors, obscuring your vision and making it hard to fight your enemies. I wouldn't call it a deal breaker, as Enter the Matrix is still fairly playable even with the wonky camera, but it will lead to several frustrating situations where you fail a jump, or get killed by an unseen
die.
enemy because the camera won't behave.
Right.
Alleviating the camera issues is that combat is fairly straightforward and easy for the most part. Shooting works similar to True Crime's Streets of LA, automatically locking on to the nearest enemy as you start firing. Though, depending on what gun you're using, you may not have the best accuracy unless you're using bullet time. Like I mentioned before, there is the option to manually take your shots by using the right stick to go into first person,
I really like
but
that
outside of
sniper.
hitting explosives or using the sniper rifle, it isn't really necessary. The firearms you'll be using will be lifted off the blue pills you kill, along with your ammo too. While I'd say most of the guns are pretty good and useful, almost all of them feel like they burn through your ammo.
Now, if blue pills are cops and they die, do they die out in reality, or are they inserted back in? You know, like if they're killed from the red pills, and do the machines liquidate them and feed them to the rest of the people in the matrix that are, you know, in this, you know, setup? I don't know. Let me know in the comments below.
Ammo instantly. Partially because the amount of ammo you can carry for each one is small, and also because there aren't any
this
ammo
chamber.
pickups outside of killing an enemy carrying the same type of gun. Also, most of your weapons won't carry over into the next chapter. I've never found myself in a situation where I couldn't shoot at all, but I imagine this was the developer's way of making the player use melee and avoid solely relying on shooting. Later levels do give you the
I feel
option
like
to use
that's-
throwable grenades.
I feel like there are two games that need remasters, this one and Path of Neo. And due to 5's level of success, I don't think it's going to happen. Then again, they did remove the recent PS5 demo for the Matrix. So they might be working on that. Who knows?
But they're very unreliable. As there isn't a way to hold and aim your throw, it can be tough to actually toss a grenade in an opponent's direction. There's a good chance you end up killing yourself instead, as grenades can bounce off a ceiling or object and right back at you. Outside of a couple occasions, you aren't required to use grenades, but if you can get used to throwing them, or just running back out of a room after a throw, the radius of their explosions can easily clear a group of enemies. Oh, and the game does have some limited cover mechanics.
Yeah, it does.
Like, extremely limited, as you
Very.
can't manually take cover, and instead your character will snap to cover automatically when standing still long enough in front of a wall. From there, you can peek out in a direction and shoot, though your accuracy drops and it's much harder to hit someone. Honestly, you're better off jumping and shooting in bullet time than bothering with cover. Cover only really feels useful when you need to get to safety and wait for your health regeneration to kick in. But if all else fails, you can just hit them with some good old kung fu.
I know Kung Fu.
Show me.
The melee combat makes use of a dedicated button for punching, one for kicks, pressing both for throws,
One for dodge.
and later on using the interact button to defend and counter attacks. While you can string attacks together for
I
some
do
simple
love the combo
combos,
attacks.
the hand-to-hand combat does feel button mashy. Mostly
It
because the
does.
majority of enemies barely defend themselves, and will just stand there and eat an ass whooping. And anyone you're not currently fighting will politely wait his turn to get their ass kicked next. Also, you can trivialize most combat encounters by pressing the punch and kick button.
I hated this. I hated this mission. I hated this segment so much. I would die so many times. I'll list it if I remember here somewhere. I hated it so many fucking times. It took me like, how long did it take me? It took me 2 to 3 hours to get past this point because, well, for the most part, I was impatient, so I kind of edited some things out, but you could tell the annoyance on my face. Like, it took me forever, especially on hard mode with Niobe. It was not the business.
And at the same time, while you have a gun out, this will grab an enemy and lock them into an uninterruptible animation where you instantly one-tap them with your firearm. You do basically have to be standing still when doing it, otherwise you might do a running kick instead. But once you get the hang of it, you can spam it back to back on multiple enemies to kill them and save ammo. While this lowers the game's difficulty considerably, certain encounters, unique enemies, and gameplay sections keep it from being a complete cakewalk. For example, these driving levels that show up, which aren't hard but can be frustrating depending on what character you're playing as. If you're playing as Niobe, they aren't too bad. The driving mechanics are simple, and all you really have to do is avoid traffic while Ghost is shooting the cops or whoever's chasing you. It's a different story if you're playing as Ghost though, as these levels basically become turret sections as you gun down whatever's chasing you with infinite ammo. Problem is, the CPU-controlled Niobe is basically drunk at the wheel, and has a hard time moving around obstacles and easily loses control, or even gets stuck if hit by another car. So these sections become less about taking out who's chasing you, and more about clearing the cars ahead of you so Niobe doesn't get stuck. Thankfully, there's only a few driving sections, and I only had to redo them a few times, but they can be frustrating. Any boss encounters that pop up tend to be a spike in difficulty too. For one, your health regeneration is turned off during these encounters, and while the game also gives you health pickups, they rarely show up in the areas when you fight a boss. This leaves little room for error.
I was so annoyed at this. Like, you had little room for error. You're fucking right. It's once you get the mechanics on how to beat a boss, it's I guess doable, but you have to really, really be careful. Especially because they take a huge chunk out of your health. Kujo was one of the difficult bosses I've ever had to fight. It was more difficult than a vampire guy, and that was like relatively easy. And the other one, what's the other one? The agent in the tower. That's also a very hard mission.
As you can be killed in seconds if you don't move your ass to cover.
Yeah.
Though some encounters seem almost impossible to complete without taking a lot of damage. For example, this part in the airport chapter, where you're locked in a control room while an agent piloting a helicopter is circling around firing at you.
What did I just say? And you have to wait. You have to wait for him to stop shooting to shoot at him, and you get only 2 seconds to shoot at that plane.
There's pillars you can use for protection, but the helicopter will briefly fly away, preventing you from shooting back at it. That means the only way to hit it is when it's firing on you. But even with bullet time active, you're still going to take a lot of damage. So unless you have a particularly powerful gun with some decent ammo, it's almost guaranteed you'll die before shooting it down. The only way to win the encounter is by doing a cartwheel while you're shooting in bullet time, which you can do by pressing the strafe and jump buttons at the same time. While wonky to control, cartwheeling will let you dodge more shots while still hitting the helicopter, making it easier to win. While the game does give you a tip on how to use the cartwheel much earlier in this level, you may not immediately think to try it out during this fight. Enter the Matrix is pretty good about teaching you the basics with on-screen prompts, but more advanced moves and mechanics are only mentioned in tips that you have to read about in the pause menu, after a notification about it pops up. I like that it's non-intrusive and that it doesn't baby the player, but it can be easy to overlook those advanced moves if you're not bothering to read your tips, especially since you unlock so many while running through levels, and a lot of them are basic stuff like how to heal or throw an enemy. Overall, while a bit janky at times, I find the shooting and combat in the game really satisfying. It's simple but not too easy, and due to different objectives, gameplay sections, and enemy variety, it avoids being too repetitive.
What is he doing?
He's beginning to believe.
Ooh.
Since I'm not going to summarize the story of the game, as I'd basically be reading off like half of the plot for The Matrix Reloaded, I'm going to close out this review discussing the levels and enemies. There's some good variety to the level design, which has you going through a shipping center, to the rooftops of a city, the chateau of the Merovingi, and even the tunnels of the real world as you try to outrun a swarm of sentinels. While the game's graphics aren't the best, and lacking in color, mostly due to keeping the green shade from the movies, I do like how each level is designed. It's not always a linear path you have to follow, as several areas are fairly open, allowing you to complete objectives faster if you find a faster route to where you're going. Occasionally, you'll stumble on better weapons, or find a way to get the drop on enemies instead of directly confronting them. The way levels are broken up into smaller sections is a little weird though, and I'm assuming it's a limitation of the console versions of Enter the Matrix. as the game doesn't use proper checkpoints, instead breaking up levels into smaller segments, allowing you to manually save in between them. This ends up creating moments where you start a section, finish it in like a minute or two, and then get prompted to save before starting the next one. But then you'll get parts that run for much longer, and can feel like a slog if you die, because you get sent all the way back to the beginning of the segment. So it can make playthroughs feel disjointed, as there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason why one part can take less than a minute, and others can take upwards of half an hour. Like I said, I'm assuming this is most likely a limitation of the console versions, and a lack of memory or something, so the game couldn't use checkpoints or save states. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong and if the PC version does the same thing. Like I said, I couldn't get the thing to function properly to test it myself. As for the enemies, admittedly the variety here is small, but there's enough difference between them to keep the gameplay from being repetitive. First, you got your standard security guards and police officers, who usually wield weaker weapons like pistols, and can be comfortably kung fu'd to death without any trouble. Next up, and who you will almost exclusively fight in the later half of the game, are SWAT team members.
That was
They're
hard
beefier thanks to their riot gear, use stronger firearms that can shred you to pieces, will occasionally toss grenades, and will make use of cover to protect themselves. Going hand to hand with them is usually a bad idea, since they'll still fire at you and their buddies will shoot you too. So it's better to take them out from afar whenever possible, though the instant kill grapple attack works on SWAT too. Next are a rather unique enemy, known as the Exiles, rogue programs that come from a previous version of the Matrix and work for the Merovingi. Acting and fighting like werewolves,
Merovingi.
they can't be killed with firearms, and instead you have to fight them in hand-to-hand combat in order to stun them and use a wooden stake to kill them, with the wooden stake being instantly given to you during this section and always being equipped. The Exiles are also the first enemies that can block and counter your attacks, so you can't button mash them to death like the others. Also, some of these assholes will pull out guns and fire at you while you're trying to stake their buddies. I like them as an enemy type, and also from a lore perspective. I've always found the Exile programs interesting, and wish the movies explored the Exile programs that fill the role of supernatural beings inside the Matrix. You know, like the twins, the pale guys with dreadlocks that
Ooh,
have
I
ghost
love
powers. And finally, I've saved the best for last. The Agents. Sentient security programs that act as muscle for the Matrix. They're insanely strong, have crazy reflexes,
Of course.
and are effectively impossible to kill, at least for long. While the game uses them very sparingly, when they do show up, just like the movie, you run.
Yes.
Working more as stage hazards than a proper enemy, levels with agents usually have you running your ass off as they give chase, or have them overtake a nearby NPC to try to take you out. In the rare instances when you have no choice but to fight, you won't be able to win by normal means, and instead have to use the environment to incapacitate them, like tossing them into a computer server to electrocute them. You're not just dealing with run-of-the-mill agents either, as if you manage to beat Seraph when you fight him in the tea house, you'll unlock a couple extra levels
Now, wasn't Seraph an agent before? Like, I think I saw a theory that he used to be one of the Guardians in the previous Matrix.
that have you confronting and running from multiple copies of Agent Smith. I remember playing the game as a kid, and these guys scaring the shit out of me when they
Yeah.
popped up,
Yes,
because I always managed to get myself killed by them fast. Though I'm only now realizing that I might not have known how to play the game properly, as despite how I just hyped up agents, they weren't too bad this time around. Again, because you're expected to run and not actually fight them most of the time. Man, what I wouldn't give for a new Matrix game that makes agents like Mr. X or Nemesis from the Resident Evil remakes. Unkillable hunters that stalk you throughout your playthrough of the game,
That's what I'm talking about. That's what we need.
and need you to hide from them or incapacitate them long enough so you can lose them. That'd be so awesome.
Hey, yo, whoever made the Matrix, oh my goodness, I hope whoever is watching this, a developer of some kind that worked on that Matrix demo, please, we need one just like that. Sometime next year or something.
Awesome. Too bad all they did was use the Matrix for a tech demo for Unreal Engine 5. And too bad the Matrix
I know I'm probably talking to the air, but, just sending vibes out there.
Resurrection flopped so hard that
Calling
any
the
plans to
MG.
do anything with the franchise is effectively dead. Oh well. At least we got Agent Smith in Multiverses, right? To sum up my thoughts, I love Enter the Matrix. And it still holds
I
up
didn't know that.
surprisingly well 20 years later.
I didn't know he was in
Yeah,
Multiverses.
there's definitely some jank. The controls aren't the best. The camera sucks. And I did encounter quite a few bugs here and there that forced
But
a
it's
reset too.
It's great. for
Also,
what it
despite
is.
using music from the movie, the way tracks are coded in-game causes them to not loop properly, creating moments where the music is trying to shift dynamically to match the combat, but abruptly cutting out when a fight ends. And while the excellent live-action cutscenes do a lot to flesh out stuff skipped over in The Matrix Reloaded, Ghost and Niobe feel painfully underdeveloped. And especially Ghost, as while Niobe got more focus in the movies, he basically disappears as a character. Like shit, I completely forgot he and Trinity are brother and sister. Well, technically they're not blood related.
He's in love with her. That's a crazy revelation. You know, to be in love with someone you can never have. Then again, yeah, I was gonna say Neo died, but so did she. So.
But they treat each other as siblings because they were both freed from the Matrix at the same time.
Exactly.
Also, as we learned during his encounter with the Merovingian's wife Persephone, Ghost has unrequited feelings for Trinity.
Exactly.
But he's never acted on them because the Oracle told him she'd fall in love with Neo. Which, yeah, I guess there isn't really much you can do to explore that angle since that's fate and destiny or whatever. But maybe Trinity could have set him up with someone else instead of just getting into a simulated fight? I don't know. Enter the Matrix isn't a perfect game by any means, but I think it's the perfect example of how to adapt a movie into a video game. Instead of trying to condense a movie or book into a game, the game can work as a supplemental piece to its source material.
That was an excellent approach to a movie adaptation for, you know, a game. Excellent approach. Different cutscenes that weren't shown in the movie for this game. Amazing.
Following new characters, exploring and expanding the...
I do wish we had gotten more of that white suit, though. I wish there was like an outfit mechanic where we can change our outfits in the Matrix. That would have been awesome.
Setting, adding more to its story without having to worry about staying true to the canon, or if the gameplay conflicts too hard with the story. As following those traits is how we got some of the best licensed video game adaptations, like the various Star Wars games, The Witcher, X-Men Origins Wolverine, the various Lord of the Ring games, and so much more. The next Matrix game, Path of Neo, would stick closer to the movies, but it also changed things up in its own way, allowing it to stand as its own thing and separate from the trilogy. But that's a discussion for another day. And that's the video. Thanks for watching. And special...
That was cool. I really enjoyed that. Well. I can never get enough of that stuff. Enough of that content. But let me know what you think about this video down in the comments below. Let me know what other gaming videos you want me to react to. Like and subscribe if you vibe. Become a beaut today. And I will see you guys on the live streams. Take care. Thanks for stopping by.